Confidence in ownership, the arena, and the head coach. Trending up, trending down. Pelicans fans aren't holding back, and we're going to talk about it right now in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcast and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Thursday, and we are tackling some big topics in today's show. We're going to look at Gayle Benson and the perception of her as the fan base, and I'm going to push back on a few things with that. I also want to get into the arena and the true importance of it, and then we're going to look at your confidence in head coach Willie Green. We got a lot to cover in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner and closer than you think. So right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets. Download the FanDuel app to get started over at FanDuel.com. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget, you can catch Locked On Pelicans on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every weekday at 10:30 a.m. Channel 7.1 in New Orleans, same place you watch your Pelicans play. So let's get into this one. We're covering the fan survey and reading your responses here. And I want to get into some of the bigger topics: ownership, the arena, and the head coach in Willie Green. But let's start literally at the top with Gayle Benson here. You know, I had two questions there that I really think kind of just get to the heart of what we're looking at when it comes to ownership and what their role is supposed to be. I am going to push back on one thing in a minute here. The first question with Gayle Benson was, do you think Gayle Benson is a cheap owner? 47% said yes, 33% said no, and 20% said uncertain, right? That kind of uncertainty carried over to when I asked fans to rate her stewardship of the team on a scale of 1 to 10. The average score was a 4.8, which, if we're looking at it, is technically a failing grade, but it's just kind of right in the middle here. And this is where perception really matters, I think, right? This kind of speaks to a lot about the Pelicans need to change the perception of the team here. Even when this franchise does something smart, maybe it's, extending Herb Jones or not trading away Trey Murphy, it's going to get filtered through this lens of, but is that the cheap option that they're doing in some capacity, right? When you compare that to some other markets, you look at this of Milwaukee spending deep in the tax to keep Giannis happy and other certain teams, right? It feels like New Orleans is lagging behind and not doing that. And fans notice, right? Like, you notice if the team is kind of being cheap. Now, something I want to keep in mind with this is I don't actually think this is a cheap franchise. This is the part I want to push back on. Could they be doing more? Oh, yes, absolutely. I don't want you to think this is like a full-on defensive ownership or anything like that, right? If you look at their average salary from when Tom and Gayle Benson bought the team, in the time that it's just been that ownership group, they have finished basically averaging 15th in terms of salary per season. They are not bottoming the roster out, trying to keep salary as low as possible. They are willing to spend. They get right to the luxury tax a number of years. There have been a couple of years where they're like basically right on the line of it and only like a couple $100,000 below the luxury tax threshold. That to me does not scream cheap, right? Cheap used to be the Los Angeles Clippers under Donald Sterling, who wanted to just make a profit that he could use on other things and kept payroll low and kept that team intentionally bad. Though it hasn't worked out, this team has kind of been going for it for years. They have been spending. They built a new practice facility. They have renovated said practice facility twice now, really spending money on upgrading their facilities and trying to make it one of the tops. And even when you looked at, and I talked about this last season, the NFL doing a fan survey, and they share a lot of the facilities with the Pelicans. The Saints graded out pretty high in terms of that player survey. You know, the thing that was like the biggest knock was like the cafeteria wasn't good. Well, that's all been recently renovated and isn't a problem anymore. For the Saints, the biggest issue was like their head coach, and no one liked Dennis Allen. So when I look at this of people, basically 50% saying Gayle Benson is cheap, yes, you know, that comes down to luxury tax, right? Like that's truthfully what this is. You know, they're one of, and I've used this before, they're one of two franchises that has never gone into the luxury tax at all. But look, there's some misinformation around that. I'm probably a little bit guilty when it comes to that as well with everything, because that doesn't really tell the whole picture of things, right? The Milwaukee Bucks only recently have started going into the luxury tax to build around Giannis, right? You look at a team like Detroit, which is actually a pretty big market. They've been in the luxury tax one time while Joe Dumars was there in 2004, and their luxury tax payment was like barely anything. It was $750,000. Atlanta, big market, right? They've only been in the luxury tax twice. The Houston Rockets, by the way, right? Houston, massive market. They've only been in the luxury tax twice. Chicago, twice. They're a cheap team, right? Indiana Pacers were going to go into the luxury tax, but then cheaped out this year after the Tyrese Halliburton injury. They haven't been in it since 2004. There's a number of these teams that you would think should be in the tax regularly, just have not been for whatever reason, right? So when you look at New Orleans, yeah, they've never been in there, but they're only one off from a team like Detroit. They're only two times off of a team like the Houston Rockets. And I think needing that proper context is important in all of that, right? Houston's total tax payments ever are $5.63 million. It's not like it's a lot here. And so when you look at this franchise under the Benson ownership to today, because the stuff before that doesn't really matter, it's not relevant when talking about ownership, is, you know, has there been a team that's worthy of paying the luxury tax for? And you pay it every year if you wanted to, but keep this in mind that only about like 6 to 10 teams are in the luxury tax in any given year. It's not like 3/4 of the league is, or something along those lines. So when Gayle Benson is kind of rated here as a cheap owner, this is more just due to the luxury tax payments, and said that, hey, you know, when the time is right, go for it. We'll see if the team actually does that. But truthfully, I don't know if there's been a team that it's like, oh, add the one piece that we know you can get, but they don't because they're being cheap. Dumping Kyra Lewis Jr. to get under a tax when you're a playing tournament team, like, doesn't really bother me a ton, because then more money is coming into the team that they can hopefully reinvest. You know, you can get a tax payment of something like $15+ million. That's worth keeping in mind to reinvest into the facility and other things for a year when, like, you don't need to pay it. And again, it's not like every team is doing it. And when you look at some of these smaller market teams, yes, some of them have done it. The Utah Jazz have paid a lot in luxury tax payments. They truthfully have. They're one of these smaller markets, you know, in the league, along with New Orleans. In Utah, where is their total? Because they've actually been decent about like going in and paying. They paid $30 million in luxury tax payments. They were last in it 2 years in a row. What year is that? In 2020 and 2021. You know, there's reasons to do it if you have a competitive team, but it's not like the Pelicans are like so cheap and everyone else is doing this thing and other teams aren't. That I do think is worth keeping in mind. The bigger one to me is the stewardship, right? Like, this comes to winning. This is a team that just has not consistently won, and at times does seem to feel like a little too stuck in their eras. Should they have pulled the plug on the Zion Williamson era sooner rather than later? They haven't, right? You know, did they keep David Griffin a little bit too long? You even look at the hire of Joe Dumars. Did they rush that process and truthfully find the best person, or did they just go with someone familiar who they felt was safe, and it makes it look like a lazy process? Those are all valid things to ask, and I think that rating of her stewardship of the team is much more important to look at than the cheap stuff, because they spent a lot of money on that facility and other things, and hopefully one day that will apply to the roster when someone has built a roster worthwhile. But the 4.8 out of 10, right in the middle, seems about right for ownership here, truthfully. And hopefully they can figure this out soon, that number can rise. If they were winning, that number would be higher. It all comes down to that, right? winning. But I do think some context around some of the luxury tax and what their salaries have been is a pretty important thing to look at with this team, because we can see, where the team is in terms of tax right now. Hold on, let me pull it up where they are going into this season. The Pelicans have, where did the number just go? They're 19th in payroll. They're $4.2 million from the luxury tax. 12 teams are in the luxury tax right now. Only 2 of them, I would say, is a small market. In Orlando is considered a small market. Milwaukee's not even in there right now. So it's just really them, and that's kind of it. So keep that in mind when judging Gayle Benson. Do they need to do more to kind of like truthfully invest in the team? Yes. Right? Like, could you have spent more money to really do a search and find, maybe it was going to be Joe Dumars, but do the proper search. The everydayers have heard me kind of rail against the process of hiring him. All of those things, yeah. Should they have invested more in the facility in the first place? Yes. But they are doing it now, and I do think that is a worthwhile thing to kind of keep in mind, that I don't think this team is like intentionally trying to be cheap. I think circumstances just haven't really kind of come together for it to be correct. One thing that can help, though, with money and revenue and not being cheap is an arena. Let's talk about the arena situation, what you thought about the game day experience, what you feel the importance of getting a new arena, and why that matters, really matters for this team. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel has been supporting Locked On for years. This might be the best offer that I've seen. $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, they got him. The spreads, or just money line to straight up pick a winner, you can do it. Combine all of that into a same game parlay, or you can even jump in live as the game unfolds and you realize trends are happening. And it's quick, easy, and just the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. You just did the Pelicans fan survey, but Locked On has a survey for you as well. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started, and everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. That's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. And look, we appreciate it over at Locked On. Help us make the shows better for you. So let's switch gears to the arena, because I actually think all of the stuff that we're going to talk today is really tied together. It's really going to kind of crescendo with Willie Green coming up here, right? Ownership and that kind of talk factors into another really big picture topic, the arena here. One of the questions I put in there was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for the Pelicans to get a new arena or a refurbished Smoothie King Center? So upgrading the Smoothie King Center in some capacity here, right? This one, the other day we talked about the show, not the show, but things kind of being rated a mid, right down the middle in all of this. This one was not like that. This one was very cut and dry when it comes to your feelings on the arena here. And this one graded out at a 7 out of 10. People felt this is important and that it is very important for the Pelicans to get that new arena. Look, I agree with this. I very much agree with this, that you've got to do something. I'll get into the current game day experience in a minute here, because I disagree with that one. But the importance of arena is look, you guys saying it's a 7 out of 10 is kind of like a clear mandate here. And look, I get it, right? You walk into the Smoothie King Center, the concourses are a little bit outdated. The food and beverage options just like aren't great. There's a lack of premium seating. By NBA standards, this arena is behind the times. They've done, the surveys and things like that of it. And like some of the stuff is like critical failures of like, they're just outdated. It's not going to work. And, a new arena is not just about like comfort of going to a game. A modern arena is going to bring in more money. There's more opportunities for sponsorships, premium seating. It can help attract concerts and events, which just helps the local economy and all of that. That revenue is what allows you to go deep into the luxury tax and still be financially viable in a small market, right? A new arena will help the Pelicans generate more money and hopefully then, provide some of the things here with it all. Like that's an important thing to really keep in mind. But here's the bigger reason for it. This gets lost. Like when people are like, I want a new arena. Yeah, you want a new like fancy arena. Look, there's some civic pride in that. Like that's our building. Look at what we have. You feel a sense of ownership over it. I completely understand it. But the bigger thing is the long-term future of the Pelicans in New Orleans. Look, the team is going to do everything they can. They're not. Gayle Benson is not selling the team. They have no intention of letting this team move away even when she passes, given there are no heirs and there's a succession plan in place. That has been made clear in articles published. That has been made clear to me behind the scenes as well. This team is not moving whatsoever. But the biggest way that you can guarantee the team is here, no matter what happens in the future, is with a long-term lease. Long-term lease, that's what it is, right? I believe this lease, I might have this incorrect. We'll do a whole other show where I asked a couple people some more details for it, about through 2029. It's a couple years from now. You've got to figure that out and keep this team here long-term. That also means there's time to refurbish and upgrade the Smoothie King Center with all of this, right? But if you build a new arena, you upgrade the Smoothie King Center, the team commits to the city, and a lot of the concerns about Gayle Benson vanish overnight. I think, this would be a great way to kind of really show that there's so much national media noise. We talked about it with Bill Simmons a couple weeks ago here. I wouldn't read a thing into that. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And again, it has been made very clear that this team's not moving. There's no intention to sell. But the way you kind of really make fans believe that is with a long-term lease. That's the most important thing here. I want to go to the current game day experience. This was rated a 5.5 out of 10. I disagree. Like, I get it. It's outdated. You'd like better food and beverage options. If you're looking for the parking kind of sucks around it. Like all of that stuff does matter. And I completely understand. The sound system is not great. That's been needing an upgrade for years. But I will say this, if you go to another arena to watch a game, and if your goal is to like watch basketball, Smoothie King Center is great. It's cheap. I love cheap tickets. A new arena is going to drive ticket prices up significantly. Is that something that you want? I mean, maybe, but I like a cheap arena where I can just go in, grab a beer and watch the game. Like the beer prices to be a little bit cheaper, certainly the food to be a little bit better, maybe some healthier options too would be really nice. If you're going to 41 regular season games and eating chicken tenders and fries every single game, you're not going to physically be feeling too great here. So, but I think if you look at the product on the court, Theo Mitchell, who admittedly is a good friend of mine, so I love what he does as the in-arena host. They're constantly doing like games and promotions on the court. If you go to the Lakers or you go to the Clippers or some of those other places, yeah, the Clippers' new arena has some like really crazy fancy things, but most arenas around the NBA are not like doing those things on the court. There's not baby races and other things constantly. You don't have the grill toss every single game. It's usually just like Kiss Cam or the Bongo Cam at other NBA arenas. And like, that's it. There's nothing going on the court. Here, the Pelicans really do a lot, I think, for their game day experience of those type of promotions and other fun things that you don't get in other places. That does matter to me. I think that, is an important thing to keep in mind. And I think a lot of people are just kind of missing something, that perspective, if you're not regularly going to other NBA arenas. And look, if you are, you must have an awesome life. And I'm kind of jealous. So I think that's something that kind of keeps in mind with it too. I kind of just like a cheap, no frills, easy arena. Let me go watch basketball and drink beer because that's what I'm trying to do and like hang out with my friends. And I think they do a good job of that. But look, you need to upgrade some of the seating. that stuff's been in there for near 25 years. That's not great. You do need to kind of work on those sorts of things. So a refurbishment does need to happen in certain capacity. But do I need a vending machine where I can go buy Jordans? I certainly don't. I'd spend too much money on that sort of thing. They have that like at the Chase with the Golden State Warriors. Like, is that needed? Nice to have? Lanyap? Sure, but probably not needed. And that's only going to make the price of things go up. Keep that in mind when kind of thinking about the arena and also who's going to pay for it and the financing and all that. That's larger questions for another day here. But certainly they need to kind of do something to kind of elevate the experience. And that will go a long way towards kind of changing the perception of the franchise. This is a theme that I've really been hammering. So coming up next, we got a little bit of time to talk a little bit more about Willie Green, but I want to kind of talk about pressure on Willie Green, but maybe not in the way that you think. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. So let's move on to head coach Willie Green. We're running out of time because this is where the survey numbers do get really interesting. I asked fans to rate their confidence in Willie Green on a scale of 1 to 5. The average came back at just 2.1. It's low. This is year 5 for Willie Green. The excuses are basically gone. Look, and he's had a lot of excuses. Zion is barely played, it seems like, right? Health has been a massive problem for this team over the years. And so maybe we've never really gotten a full chance to evaluate Willie Green, right? But in theory, they're healthy going into this year. And even when the team has been healthy, it has felt like they have underachieved. And so in the glimpses that you've seen of Willie Green when this team's been at full strength, 49 wins 2 years ago, and it felt like they should have won like 55, right? Like they couldn't close out games. They couldn't make fourth quarter comebacks. It is a reflection on the head coach here, right? So fans aren't sold. But the question of, should Willie Green keep his job if the Pelicans make the playoffs? The responses tell you everything, right? 30% said yes, no matter what. More than that, 36.6% said only if they win a first round series. 20% said flat out no, just making the playoffs isn't enough, right? It's a very divided fan base, and that reflects what we've seen on the court. Can Willie Green make the proper in-game adjustments, which seems like it's been a struggle at times? Can he build an offense that doesn't grind to a halt when Zion sits? Because you've got to kind of factor that in, but even then it's not the best way to use Zion, so that's kind of a catch-22 there, right? Does he trust some of the young guys enough to play them and develop them? Fans are skeptical. And I completely get it. And when you tie this in with everything, right, with ownership, with the outdated arena and the perception this team is kind of stuck, look, this is a ton of pressure on Willie Green, truthfully, right? The best way to change the narrative around ownership and literally everything is win games. Who's that ultimately kind of falling? Whose shoulders does that fall on? Falls on the head coach, right? A lot of the perceptions around the franchise vanish if they win. Truthfully, just win. And everyone's happy, right? Winning cures everything. Losing, the everydayers have heard me say this, long-time listeners have heard me say this, like, is a disease that like kind of infects you and seeps into everything, seeps into the fan base too. You got to win. It's going to be on Willie Green to kind of figure this strange roster out. And maybe that's not fair to him. But at the end of the day, this is a results-oriented business. Are you winning? That's what you're here to do. And the team has not been doing that. And it has felt like they've underachieved. I think when you look at Willie Green, like, he needs a big season. Big season. And I've said, I think they should make a head coaching change early on in the year if things aren't going properly or how they want. And that wouldn't be an incorrect thing to do because there's a lot riding on this year. Joe Dumars heaped even more pressure on it by trading away next year's lottery pick. Not lottery pick, or like first round pick. Maybe it won't be in the lottery. All that stuff, it's a ton of pressure on everyone within this organization. Go back to the first thing about Gayle Benson being cheap. I'm curious what you think now that I've kind of put a little bit more context around it in terms of the luxury tax that some other teams have been paying, right? Like OKC hasn't paid it, in since 2018, 2019, since pre-COVID. They're a small market. Memphis doesn't really pay it. The Pelicans are kind of right in line with a lot of franchises, but the way we'll judge it is if they come out the gates and look incredible this year, right? Like say they look like a contender. They're $4.2 million away for the luxury tax. Do they have the go-ahead then to add a $6 million player through trade or something along those lines to upgrade the roster if they look good? If they don't do that, that's them dodging the tax. That's being cheap. When you have a team that's maybe worth paying it for, they just haven't. That kind of speaks to everything around this franchise of like, have they really had a team under the Benson's ownership? Shin's a different story. They absolutely did have teams worth paying the luxury tax for, but Shin was cheap and basically insolvent. That's not the case here. If the opportunity arises, will ownership say, yes, pay the tax? You don't want to pay the tax just to pay the tax. You don't. You've got to, again, there are limitations to a small market. We're not in Los Angeles. We're not in Chicago, not in New York, all of that. But the right team they should pay the tax for. Will they? I don't know. This might not be a question that we get a ton of an answer, much of an answer to for who knows when, how long. We'll see. Coming up tomorrow, final day, at least for now, that we're going to talk about this fan survey here. We're going to look at Joe Dumars, the front office, the overall direction around the team, and some of the moves that they have made. Let's get into that one. The Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate y'all so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. See y'all tomorrow.